Hello. Before this video begins, I would like to warn you viewers that the Blood and Gore DLC was active in this video, so it may get a bit graphic and brutal. So viewer discretion is advised because it may not be for everyone. I would also like to say that a mod was used during the making of this video. The mod is purely graphical and has no effect on the unit's performance. I just have a personal preference for the Greek helmets, the Corinthian Greek helmets, over the ones in the normal Rome 2 game, so I just used that mod as a personal preference for graphical effect, so it shouldn't intervene or change the outcome of any battles. Now that that's out of the way, let us begin. Now that that's out of the way, we can begin. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Rome 2 Unfortified Defense walkthrough. In today's episode, we are going over Armenia. Now, Armenia has a similar unit roster to Parthia and a number of other factions. Now, when I would normally think of Parthia and Armenia, I think of those weak infantry units that have these rectangular shields and spears. But they can actually be much stronger than we thought, because they are considered medium spear infantry by the game, and if used correctly, they can be a very effective fighting force. Now, they can be easily dealt with and killed by slightly superior units, but if used correctly, with flanking maneuvers and hitting around the back, they could be a very effective and strong unit, as I am about to show you today. So let's get started. So our first battle today is actually against Parthia. Now, I decided to fight Parthia because they're actually quite close to Armenia and they have a similar unit roster. As you saw a few seconds ago when the map was loading in, we saw that we have a very similar army composition. Now, we are slightly outnumbered, but it is still 50-50. And this time, we don't actually have a cavalry general's unit, we have a normal infantry unit as the general, so they will be partaking in the battle. We also happen to have a cavalry unit here, just to show how to use the cavalry units. Now, I decided to change it up from my previous videos by doing it actually at night. So let's get started. As always, when playing against the AI, I decide to set up my soldiers according to where the AI is positioned. So seeing as the AI is positioned right in front of me along this large central area, I'm expecting the majority of their forces to come through here. But since they're so spread out, they could easily go to the left or right side, so we should be wary of that. But even though they could go to the right side, I am expecting them, if they do go to the right side, to take a sharp turn to our left and go back down the center. Now, this battle didn't go exactly as planned. My plan for using the cavalry was to ambush the enemy skirmishers. Unfortunately, they ended up going around us, and those that did go down the center were a big pain to deal with, because the enemy cavalry was quite strong and had decided to assist in defending, which caught me off guard. So mistakes like these will happen sometimes, and we just have to deal with them and try to improvise with the situation. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to maneuver the cavalry around the enemy cavalry unit so I can reach the enemy skirmishers, because the enemy skirmishers will easily tear apart our weakest units, and even our strong units. Unfortunately, we are quite failing at that, and seeing as the enemy main forces and infantry have moved in, I'm trying to now get my escape by finishing off the enemy cavalry unit and trying to run away. Now, I could continue fighting, but seeing as how many units have arrived, I want to retreat to give me the best chance of striking in the back when the opportunity is perfect and presented. Unfortunately, I get hit quite hard, so I am forced to basically give up this unit. Now, here our infantry is unleashing a lot of firepower into the enemy ranks, but unfortunately they have made contact. Fortunately for us, we have a lot of javelin men and skirmishers in the back, which allows them to throw over the heads of our men and quickly dealing with that first charge. But the charges continue. And this is that weak infantry I was talking about with the rectangular shields. But in the meantime, while all of this is happening here on the front line, and we've already lost our extremely expensive and heavy cavalry, on the right side I actually sent skirmisher cavalry. So to go around, now the plan to use them was to go around the back while the main force distracted the enemy and shoot into their backs where they were the least protected. Unfortunately, this did not work out, for they sent units all the way to the right side, which I did not expect, and it allowed them to not only flank us because I was too busy paying attention on the front line instead of here, but it also stopped me from advancing and carrying out my plans. And unfortunately, I did not notice the enemy attack until they hit. But my plan in the meantime, before I noticed they had attacked, was to maneuver the units on the left side. Since they were not in combat and the enemy didn't seem to be interested on the left side, I decided to maneuver them around to try and flank around. And these happened to be those rectangular shield soldiers, which I normally associate with weak soldiers and not really that good at holding a line, more like something to use to gain experience and level up your soldiers and units. So I am forced to maneuver my skirmishers away into a bit of a worse situation where they're more blocked up by all the men, and I am forced to maneuver my general's unit to intervene. Luckily, the general's unit is heavy spear infantry, which means they easily deal with this force. Now, I tried using my cavalry to break through these guys, but unfortunately, spears are a great counter to cavalry, and unfortunately that ended up losing a lot of lives for us. So now what we're trying to do is we're trying to hold the main line with as many of our men as possible to distract the enemy while we try and flank around the back. So far, the flanking has gone really well. We have met little resistance and are easily breaking up any that we encounter. Our strongest units are starting to suffer though. Although they are strong and they can hold out for a long time, against such numbers against equally strong units, maybe even stronger units, they will eventually fall. And although they are trying to flank and hold, the enemy is trying to better them. So now what we're trying to do is just continue using our general's unit to counterattack, to counter-push, to go back on the right side and completely stop this attack that was happening. I also decided to send one of the rectangular shielded units, which is the Eastern Spearmen, to chase down the archers so they were no longer a threat, while the remaining two units that were flanking on the left side charge in to assist our stronger units. And the battle right now is quite even, but unfortunately, victory seems quite far away and defeat seems much more likely. Multiple of our units have routed, and they do keep coming back, but victory doesn't seem as such of a good possibility. Multiple of my units are wavering, and that forces me to engage the rest of my units. So a good way to stop units from wavering is to either back them out and replace them with a new fresh unit to take their place, or just send in more units that terribly diminish the enemy's morale. So for example, hit the enemy in the back or hit them in the rear, or just charge in right next to the unit that's starting to waver. This helps your men boost their morale, seeing that, oh, we're starting to kill more of them, we're starting to win, so we might as well stay because victory is more possible and we're less likely to die. So as you see, that's what I tried to do, but unfortunately they started routing before that was accomplished. I tried to back them out, but also support them with the cavalry unit. But slowly, this is a very confusing time now, so I'm going to stop. So let's catch up on everything that's happened. So far, our general's unit has moved all the way to the right, is trying to flank around all the way on the right side to hit the enemy in the back where they'll least expect, especially a strong unit. I have one of the Eastern Spearman units to chase down the enemy missile units, so they are no longer a threat to our men on the front line, and it's just lowering the enemy's morale, seeing that they are slowly losing men. On the front line, though, we've begun to break formation. The enemy has broken through and is trying to flank us. Although our men are fighting hard, there's just too many of them, and we are kind of having an awkward positioning here to trying to counter the enemy units that we are ourselves being hit in the back. Luckily for the two Eastern Spearman units that we sent around the left side, they are doing their job. They have assisted with taking out the heavy cavalry that was dealing a lot of damage to our heavy infantry, and allowing us to continue pushing back onto the right side to try and surround the enemy, giving us an advantage. So far, the battle is in the enemy's favor, because we have fewer units and we have weaker units on the front line here. But we should never give up. Victory is always a possibility. Battles can suddenly turn in the opposite direction. I mean, for example, with the cavalry charge early on, it completely went against us. That cavalry charge could have absolutely decimated the enemy forces and won us the entire battle just by that one charge, because it would have taken out the enemy's missile units, which would have given us a great advantage. And as you see, we are starting to crumble the enemy forces. They only have 2 units left. Unfortunately for us, these are extremely strong units. This is the noble horse archers, which they were the missile units that were fighting us early on, but they're also very heavy cavalry, which means it will take a very long time to break through them, especially with our weak units. Luckily we have the Eastern Spearmen here, so the spears should be giving some bonus in fighting them. And the second unit that's still here is the Parthian Swordsmen. Now these are a quite strong melee infantry unit, and unfortunately we're stuck having to fight them with medium infantry and our skirmishers and our missile units. So it isn't in a good place. And as you see, this is the tactic I just mentioned. The units that are wavering, I try and back them out for them to regain some stamina and to just get ready. Unfortunately, they started routing, so it didn't work out. And the battle was now really, it seems to go in our favor because of the great numbers we have, but unfortunately, the enemy has such strong units that numbers might not be enough. So now we're left with 2 extremely strong enemy units versus a lot of very weak of our units with a few mediocre units. Now don't get me wrong, the general's unit, the noble spearmen, are an extremely good unit. They completely helped us regain the right flank. But in this situation, it might not be enough. But luckily, we pull through and achieve victory. With our overwhelming numbers, we achieve victory and are able to stop the enemy forces. All that remains is a single javelinman unit. Everything else has been absolutely crushed. Now this unit here of missile units has not been crushed yet, but as we see, it's wavering, and clearly when it's already at the red line and wavering, we don't think it's going to get far. Just as expected, they rout. Unfortunately, they got close to the red line, so we didn't get to chase them all down. And that's how we won this battle. This was an extremely lucky battle, and only because we fought to the bitter end. If we had given up when we knew that it seemed pretty bad, I mean, most of our units were starting to waver or rout. A lot of our units that were routing were coming back very far, and it just seemed like a very bad situation to be in, as if defeat was certain. And as we see, we did take a lot of casualties in the meantime throughout this battle. But luckily, victory is achieved, which means the enemy forces took heavy casualties, and we continue to have our town, which allows us to continue getting more income on the campaign map. So overall, this was a pretty good battle. So let's go over the key points of this battle. You should never give up, and when you have cavalry and missile units, you really have to use them to your advantage. Line up your strongest infantry units where you expect the most resistance, or where you think they will be the most vital in the battle. For example, holding key positions or flanking in such a manner that there will be no backup to assist them, but if they break through, it will be a victory. So those kind of situations where they're the most needed. Have the lighter units stay around the back to assist in holding the front line, but I usually use them to try and flank around when I'm low on heavy units and I need them to hold the front line. So I use the lighter infantry units to flank around and deal with the enemy's missile units. Now when you have cavalry, it is very important to quickly utilize it. You have to go around left, right, wherever you can and hit the enemy missile units. By hitting the enemy missile units, you will gain a huge advantage. The enemy won't be able to take out your men at range, and everything will just go much better. And so remember, try and hit the enemy in the back, always flank, and always take risks if you believe that there is a possibility of victory to be gained from that risk. So now let's go over how the battle went. We deployed almost the same amount of soldiers. We deployed slightly more, but the enemy ended up taking a lot more casualties than we did. As you see, the general's unit was utilized very well because it got almost 400 kills. And even our weakest units, the Eastern Spearmen, had gotten each a fair amount of kills. 2 units are 50 and 63 kills, and one of them even got 101 kills. So that shows you that even the weakest unit in your army or garrison can still play a major role in a battle. Because although they were medium spearmen, they do get killed quite easily when you think of that unit. But as you see in this video, you can see that if utilized correctly, this unit can be a force to be reckoned with, easily taking out the enemy skirmishers, flanking around, and making battle-changing actions like charging into the enemy heavy cavalry. Alright, so now let's move on to the second battle. Now for this battle I thought, who better to fight than the Greeks? I mean, why shouldn't you fight the Greeks? I mean, after you deal with Parthia, you're probably very likely to encounter the Greeks as your next opponent. So why not go over how to fight them? Now, remember, in these videos, victory is not certain. In these replays that I'm showing you, this is just showing you how to utilize the units to a good potential of the units, to allow you to either cause heavy casualties or just achieve victory. Well, you usually prefer victory, but sometimes a defeat and heavy enemy casualties is much better. So here, the enemy movement quite surprised me. What I was expecting the enemy to do, since they were lined up in this straight line here, I expected them to go down the left and then down the center. But from previous experiences on maps with a similar layout to this one, I did expect some units on the right, so I was slightly prepared for that. But unfortunately, I was not prepared for such a great movement of units, including very heavy spear infantry. Now I did expect some units to go around the left side here because it was an opening for them, so obviously they tried to do everything in their power to do as much damage as possible. So I was prepared and sent some of the Eastern Spearmen to deal with the enemy medium melee cavalry. And then my plan with this battle was to draw the enemy, most of their forces, down the center. By doing this, I could have easy access with my missile units to shoot into the enemy ranks, but also to easily hit them in the sides where they'd be the weakest. Now I tried to engage the Eastern Spearmen because I thought, okay, this is a big mistake for the enemy. I mean, come on, engaging cavalry versus spears, I mean, I think we know who's going to win. Unfortunately, this cavalry unit really surprised me. And although my Eastern spearmen tried their best to stop these Athenian cavalry units, they were just not enough, it seemed. So I was trying to maneuver around the left side so I could still do this great ambush that I had planned, but everything was falling apart. None of the units were so far going down the center. All of the units were going down the left and right side, and even going far left instead of just to the left side here, which was extremely surprising. But I also saw an opportunity. I saw an opportunity to take out the enemy slingers. An opportunity like this won't come up again, so I thought I better use one of the Eastern spearmen units to chase it, because these Persian hoplites, they will be much slower. So I decided to do just that, especially right after they started firing into my men. But the enemy continues being unpredictable by charging their cavalry where I least expected it. Luckily, these hillmen should have an easier time dealing with this cavalry. But, once again, something goes wrong. The enemy has thorax hoplites, which are very heavy spear infantry charging right into our back. So not only are we engaged in combat right now, but we are also being overrun on the left side. So on the right side, I'm forced to engage all of my units. Now I think this may have been the killer decision, because by charging in all of my units, I was not allowed to flank into the enemy position, which allowed the enemy a greater advantage. I mean, in the previous video, we saw that hoplites are extremely good at holding a position, and they can really make a huge difference in a battle. So engaging with hoplites wasn't the best idea here. And we quickly see the result of that with the Eastern spearmen starting to rout. I still tried to do as much damage as possible and try to hold off the enemy thorax hoplites so my hillmen can finish off this cavalry unit and try and assist. Unfortunately, it's just not going well. It's going so badly that I was forced to move my general's unit all the way to the right side to try and flank around. I was met with some resistance from archers, but they were quickly dealt with. So now I have to continue moving around. And everything is going very badly. After a heavy battle with the enemy cavalry on the left side, we have finally broken through, but that leads to, of course, heavy resistance from pikemen and some spearmen. And we know how strong pikemen can be from my previous video. Even worse is the enemy units have completely encircled my Persian hoplites. They're usually a very good unit in holding the fighting for the Armenian army. Unfortunately, today they have been completely surrounded and they're starting to waver, so it doesn't seem that good for them today. I see that everything is falling apart, so I'm forced to do a few things. I'm forced to engage my general in the back, into the Athenian back of the right side to try and cripple their army as quickly as possible. Seeing that we've encircled them, they begin to rout, which was very good for us. That's usually what hits in the back do. Unfortunately, we were forced to sacrifice our men by charging them down to try and distract the enemy unit to give us enough time for our general's unit to arrive and do that heavy blow. Unfortunately, it was not enough time, for by the time we finish off this battle and are still making sure they rout completely, the enemy forces have arrived on the left side. In the center, the hillmen are still holding, but unfortunately we see that defeat seems certain for this unit because it is overrun by not only 2 units, but also pretty strong units. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reset my trap. The slinger units that are, the javelinmen units that are out of ammunition, I try and have them fully run down the units that are in a safe spot for me to reach. but I'm also trying to lay this trap that I had planned for earlier, which was to surround the enemy forces. Unfortunately, the enemy decided to move in their pikemen first, and from my experiences with pikemen, I knew this was going to go very badly. So I had a very difficult choice to make, and it was between a rock and a hard place. I either wait for the pikemen to arrive and try and slowly go around them, but might be stopped by units that are starting to arrive, or I might charge in now when their spears are up, so it's easier for me to reach them, but I'm not able to surround them. So I decided to charge in. Unfortunately, this didn't work out. They put down their spears just in time, and they've begun to push us back. Furthermore, their units begun to arrive, and were starting to try and surround us. They weren't surrounding us yet, but they were getting quite close to it. So now all that remained was that one Eastern Spearman unit that was chasing down those missile units, and then a missile unit here to our right to try and chase down any routing units. But all that really remains is the general unit and a few hoplites, which are about to rout because they are overwhelmed. As you see, we had so many units of Armenian units here just to fight this singular pikeman unit, and unfortunately, they failed. And this is not even including the previous battles that occurred on the left side. They didn't do much damage. So now I'm going to speed up, since I think we all know what the outcome is going to be when just one unit seems to be remaining. Well, there's more than one unit remaining, but those other units are so far away they won't really make a difference. Luckily for the general's unit, the javelin men come back. So I took this risk, and it ended up going very badly. I had planned to attack the enemy forces, flank them, but the AI had outsmarted me. They had done something I had not expected from an AI to do. A player, yes, maybe, even likely. But an AI, I never expected this to happen from them. For them to fully trick me into setting up my army in a place where they barely moved into. And then to trick me into going to multiple formations and positions, which forced me into really bad tactical spots, which eventually led to the defeat. Now, although we have 2 units remaining here, we see that although they were starting to rout the enemy forces, we see it's clearly not enough. I mean, a light unit won't really make a difference against heavy units. So let's see the outcome. Considering the odds we were placed against, this is a pretty good outcome. Now, we had light to medium units for the most part, with a few heavy units, while the enemy had almost entirely, if not entirely, just heavy units that would easily decimate our forces. And yet we were still able to hold out and do a lot of damage. I mean, our general got over 300 kills, our missile units got at least 100 kills each, and a lot of our units got plenty of kills too. So the Armenian forces can be powerful if played correctly, but you really have to strategize and think how you're going to use them, because they're not the best units you could possibly use. But if used correctly, they can be a force to be reckoned with. But as we saw here today, Greeks are a force not to be messed with. If you're playing as Armenians, Romans, whoever, don't mess with the Greeks unless you have a sizable force and a good general to lead the way. I hope this video was helpful in battling as the Armenians as well in Rome 2, because the Armenians I personally have a bit of a difficult time playing as. I'm used to playing as the Greeks, the Romans, the Carthaginians, and units like those, and this is just a bit out of my way, but still, I was very surprised that this, in my opinion, weak unit is able to make such a good difference in a battle just by simply flanking. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope this was helpful. If you liked it, then please share it with others if you can, and remember to continue watching so you can continue learning and becoming a better general yourself. Thank you for watching.